Right, so let's discuss a case where the air resistance is not negligible and a thing is falling under the influence of gravity. So in this video, we will not be actually talking about air resistance negligible. We'll be talking about the air resistance to be present, right? So there, when there is air resistance, what's going to happen? So this was the graph of the, body falling in free fall without the air resistance. Now let's talk about what will happen if the thing starts to fall. For example, this ball falling from a very tall tower and suddenly air resistance starts to play its role. So what is going to happen? When the ball starts to fall down, since it does not have much velocity, and we know all the resistive forces, they depend upon the velocity of something. Something is standing still, there won't be any air resistance acting on it. But when something starts to move, there will be little air resistance. It starts to move faster, there will be more air resistance. So air resistance is something that actually depends upon the velocity of that thing. And we know when the ball starts to fall down, it will be at a very low velocity, at 10 meters per second, in 1 second, and it will start to increase like you would see in this graph. So as the velocity starts to increase, the air resistance would also start to increase. So what is going to happen is that as the air resistance starts to increase, it will eventually be equal to the force of gravity that is acting on it. So when once it starts, it gets equal to the weight of the ball. What is the change we are going to observe? So the change that we are going to observe is going to be like this. So the ball is actually first accelerating at 10 meter per second square, but once the gravity, the force of gravity is, it gets equal to the air resistance. When air resistance is equal to the force of gravity, what's going to happen is that what's going to happen is that the velocity, since we know from the Newton's second law that the net force is always equal to the mass into acceleration. So when there is no net force, because the gravity that was actually pulling something down, and air resistance, which is actually resisting the motion and it is providing an upward force, so these are, when they're balanced out, there is no net force, and when there is no net force, the acceleration is going to be zero. And we know acceleration is the change in velocity per unit time, and when acceleration is zero, the change in velocity is also zero. So there is no change in velocity. So the graph would actually won't be actually going up, and it will start to go flat like that, and the body will reach a constant velocity, which we precisely call terminal velocity, right? So we'll be actually putting more light on that in the next video, but this is how the graph of a body moving or falling down in the presence of air resistance would look like. You could just imagine the air resistance to be, start to influence the motion right here. Right in the start, there was no resistance because the velocity was too low. But when it started to gain velocity, it actually got affected by air resistance, and then its velocity became constant, which we call terminal velocity to be precise.